So Danielle, we've just started this. In some ways, this past week, we had Jason Watson come look at it, and he's helping us adjust it. We had Michael Cosper. We're going to add a whole collaboration piece. So we're beginning. This was kind of a week to test it out and to see how it goes. So I think we're going to, as we go through these 7 weeks, I think we're going to have more and more people. But it's fun today because we don't have to break into groups and all of that. So. Um, Danielle, you said you were a consultant. What area of consultancy do you do?
Primarily missionary training, but then organizational development really is the easier, concise way of saying it. It's very varied based on each organization.
So primarily working with NGOs in mission or a combination? And when you say mission retrainment, what does that mean?
So that was my background, was helping to set up training schools for cross-cultural workers. And so that's a little bit of what I'm doing here. There's a new staff team that haven't received much training yet, but are already operational. So kind of doing some backdating training for that team, and we'll be starting a missionary training school in September that we're opening up wider to external international applicants, but primarily it's for the Khmer NGO staff.
So the training is people that are coming in and you're training them to be mission. Okay. That makes sense. So, and Go Hong Yi, I know you've done consulting. He asked the best questions, by the way. He's just got a doctorate from Bakke Graduate. I'm the chancellor of Bakke Graduate University, was president for 20 years. And so we were founded by Lausanne. I'll go into that detail a little bit. But Jonathan has just graduated. And any update from you, Jonathan, on all your fun stuff? And by the way, he does ask the best questions. I've just never, of all the students we've ever had, Jonathan, can he keep asking questions and never stop? And it's just fun because they're great questions. And half the time I have no idea what the answer is. So I just go, what does everybody else think? But he's really smart. So Jonathan, any update on you? What's your, maybe so that they get to know you a bit better?
Well, I completed my doctorate in May, and then it will appear that I was joking with God and said that, hey, God, you're not giving me enough business. And then the reply was, I need you to complete my doctorate. So I completed my doctorate, and I'm still complaining to God that it's not giving me enough business from a business side of the thing. So what I do is I balance my time between earning money and serving the NGOs on a pro bono basis. I've been spending more time applying what I've learned in my doctorate. So my doctorate topic was on community-centered calling. So a hybrid version of what Dr. Hendricks talks about in terms of giftedness, but I moderated it from a community angle. And so I've been actually spending more time on it. So I've been complaining to God, that part is not earning me money. I still need my money side. And I always laugh with God and say that, hey, God, give me my chance to give my tidings, because no money means no tidings as well, right? So it's always good to complain to God about that as well. But I think it's a good chance. And I think that I realized that helping people find their calling is very, very key. Otherwise, too many times we have a lot of people with what my friend called an orphan spirit, because they don't know the Father. And if you don't know the Father, you won't know the caller. And if you don't know the caller, there's actually no calling. You are just actually burning out and trying to do things on your own strength, which I think is possible, but then you're no different from a person who does not know God, right? So I think that I think that's a very important concept. And I joined this session was simply that I've been hearing a lot about this movement, and actually I was deciding whether I should join. I've been disturbing Kathy a lot because I was telling her that my supervisor and my second reader has been trying to convince me to convert my dissertation into a certificate, and I've been lazing about it as well. So anyway, so I've been disturbing Kathy for that as well. Before that, I was disturbing Corinne because I was doing the LMS as well. So anyway, that's the reason why. And then I decided I will sign up for it to just learn more about it. Hopefully
this is a fun topic. You'll like this topic. It's a fun topic.
I hope so. And I'll be asking a lot of questions. Yes, I will be asking a lot. That's the only way I learn best. I will ask questions. So Danielle, sorry if I dominate. Feel free to ask more questions to compete with the domination. I think that's the best way to learn, and that's the best way to extract whatever you can from Dr. Smith's head. That's my lesson that I learned. So anyway, he can't ask too many people a question. There's only 4 of us. So the most he can ask is ask you or Kathy to answer the question as well. So I think that's all that we have.
You always have a lot of energy, so thank you. So Kathy is the director of her certificate program for BGU. Kathy, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Kathy. I live near Atlanta, Georgia, so in the southeastern United States. I am director of certificates, and I'm working on my PhD actually with Bakke. I graduated with the master's in 2016, and now I've moved on to this. My dissertation topic is the leadership experience of women leaders in grassroots economic empowerment programs as part of a polycentric mission organization. So all of the topics that are in this certificate are fascinating to me. But also this one is specifically interesting to me.
So the first time I met Kathy, she was in Guatemala City working at a garbage dump. And so she has had quite a few adventures. She lives outside of Atlanta, Georgia in the United States now. And she's the one that's put together the whole certificate. And we're just very, very grateful for that. So let's just jump into this topic. So Danielle, you may not know the history, but Bakke Graduate University actually came out of the Lausanne movement. So after 89 Manila, Lausanne really kind of went through a decade of not doing well, just a lot of inactivity. And oh, by the way, being backing up from there, 1966, Billy Graham was aware of missions was happening around the world and people were not paying attention to it. And, of course, he's Billy Graham. And so he put together a meeting in Berlin and introduced to the Western mission world all these amazing people he had found outside of the Western world. And people were just shocked. They said, God is doing this. And these are like really smart leaders. And so in response to what happened in 66 in Berlin in 1974, they did a more formal meeting to accomplish the same thing at a different level in Lausanne. That's where it came from. John Stott wrote the Lausanne Covenant. Samuel Escobar and Rene Padilla said, this is ridiculous. We don't like it. It's all about proclamation gospel, and you're not doing demonstration gospel. So fortunately for John Stott, they went back into hotel room, edited, and now it has more of a proclamation and demonstration of the gospel, which really set off the Lausanne movement very differently, healthily, because of the involvement of Latin American theologians. In 1982, they had formed, didn't have issue networks back then. So what they did is they formed senior associates and associate groups. One of them was urban cities. And so a guy named Ray Bakke and Bryant Myers and a bunch of others started visiting cities. And they would usually have 5 to 10-day listening consultations to say, what is God doing in this city? Reported in 89, and then the only associate group that actually survived or was strong during the 90s was the Urban Associates Group. And so by the end of the 1990s, Lausanne said, you've done 250 listening exercises, okay, in cities around the world, true. And guess how they were funded? Partly by World Vision, but Ray Bakke had a brother named Dennis Bakke, who started the largest electricity company in the world. The only two organizations that owned more electricity than him were Russia and France. And so it was considered at that point, and there's 4 generations of what's called polycentric or decentralized leadership, going back to 1850s. We're not going to go into all that. But his company, he asked the question, if I'm going to start a company and display the kingdom of God, how would I do it differently? And it is still studied in MBA programs as one of the most, and I'll use the word polycentric. They usually use the term decentralized. One of the biggest, first major decentralized company in the world. And so what you have is this fun thing about Ray listening to all these people in the world, and Dennis, who'd organized this, company with 36,000 employees and however many, 30 nations, doing a radical decentralized. He was blasted in the Wall Street Journal because he only had 100 people in headquarters with, 36,000, I think it was, employees. It was just a really interesting time to do that. So we were started by Lausanne. We did a focus group, and the focus group was 70 Lausanne leaders. They said, do not be a seminary, okay? We have too many seminaries at this point. Be a university. And what we need is we're confused by massive migration to cities, the whole change of the world around business, rather than political ideologies. And would you do a university that you make a college of business, a college of urban studies, and a college of theology, and make everybody study together? Your name should be Paradox University because it's hard to get all those groups to study together. And we said, okay, that's a bad idea. And they said, you should name it Bakke because you've got the older brother, Ray, who's an urban ethnologist, the younger brother, who's a business person, a middle brother named Lowell, who's a pastor, and a sister, Marilyn Bakke Pearson, who's a Bible women's teacher, women's Bible teacher, and women's leadership is a huge emphasis for our school. So that's how we were started. And so whenever Lausanne calls for a meeting, we did a lot of the organization of the peer learning in 2006, which is the original Young Leaders meeting. Did all the table groups. So we had a team of 20 some odd people there at Lausanne doing table groups in Lausanne, Cape Town. And then Global Workplace Forum in Manila had 50 some odd people there helping them do that. So we have been, when Mama calls for their conferences, we show up. So that's our connection to Lausanne. The other thing is there's a group called the World Evangelical Alliance, and they ask us to be their trainer of their national alliances. They have 143 of them. Not all are active. And so we've done a lot of training, including some young leaders in Cambodia, specifically on the issue of local fundraising and how to help them shape their story in a way that they can raise money locally. Could be 5% of their budget. And then that becomes a way to keep them from being controlled internationally, because we also help them engage in international foundations. And so there's something about having a local accountability group, both builds trust globally, but it also, if the global comes in and says, we want you to do this, the local group goes, we'll withdraw our money, then they can come back and say, no, we are beholden to our local group, even if it's not a large percentage of their. So we've trained a lot of people in Asia through them, especially younger leaders, on fundraising and all the things that go along with that. That just seems to be the focus need. So that's kind of our background. Polycentric. So it's interesting. Have you gone through the materials? And that'll help me to know kind of. So the materials, and Jonathan, have you gone through the materials in the certificate? There's about 6 different things you do. It talks about the polycentric just the movement. It talks about polycentric resourcing. Have you seen those yet in the certificate?
Yeah, so I just started I just joined yesterday and I started reading this morning, and after reading for a while I fell asleep. So I decided I will come to the class to have accelerated learning along the way. So the short answer is no.
Okay, we'll jump in. So Paula, good to see you. How are things in Brazil?
I'm so sorry. I think I got lost with the wrong Zoom. And now that Katie sent me, it did work through. I'm sorry.
Well, good to see you.
I was in the wrong meeting, I think.
And then Joy, good to see you. How are things in Guyana? So Danielle, the point of actually, we have this kind of saying that content is bait, okay? It's like a worm. And the whole point, one thing that's good about Lausanne is they just throw content at you. And so it's great, but there's not always, we find that the content is bait for conversation. And the best things that come out of Lausanne meetings are people meet each other and then they become ongoing relationships. Sometimes they do shared projects together. And that's really the strength of Bakke Graduate University. Yeah, faculty can talk, but we actually limit faculty. If they talk too much, we don't let them come back. Their job is to not lecture. Their job is to create a learning environment. And so, okay, thank you, Joy. So I'll speak for you, Joy. I'll tell you a little introduction. So point of it is we're more about having a conversation. If there's more people in the room in the future, we'll break into groups that have questions, but we're kind of more interested in conversation and meeting people because we believe that God creates these divine appointments. And so you'll notice this won't go in, this will be talking back and forth. So Paula is actually a women's leader building women entrepreneurship training in Brazil, okay? She will be going to Seoul. She'll be present and just has done amazing work in terms of training, organizational development in Brazil. Joy Wilson is in Guyana. in Georgetown, and Joy has written a series of books. In her empowerment, she empowers women who have faced incest, which is a huge issue around the world, and has really given them a vehicle of how to be in community, how to recover from that. Two books, okay. They were long books, okay. And so, just kidding. And I'm sorry you can't see her. She is one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever met. Joy is really her nature. But so you have two people here, and you're going to Seoul too. Good, thank you, Joy. So and then Danielle is doing leadership training, organizational development in Cambodia. And so frankly, I think there's some divine appointments here. So polycentric. Okay, so polycentric is a way of describing what God is doing, and it's a new word, but there's other people who've used the words before. And the whole idea of mission from everywhere to everywhere was the way it was said back in the 90s. And even when BGU was started, we were talking about mission from everywhere to everywhere. But then out of the term polycentric comes a lot of different things. One, it describes what God is already doing. And what I like about what Alan Ye has done is he changed it not from everywhere to everywhere, but from everyone to everywhere. And what I like about that change is one of the places that has resisted polycentric mission the most is local churches. 80% or more of their budgets are all about what happens on Sunday morning and all the events that their professional staff lead, okay? And so that changes everything in terms of even how missions is done. And you will see in the polycentric article about polycentric resourcing is most of the money goes to what happens locally in the church building, the church staff. And so that it really has created a problem in terms of resourcing polycentric. So what I like about everyone is it's saying it's not about professional missionaries, but it's about people in the workplace. It's about people in the community. It's about people in families being on mission in their communities, in their workplace. And the local church sometimes is in the way of that rather than empowering that because they're pulling people into the programs and all of that. So it starts there as a problem. I think we have found that most traditional mission sending agencies from the UK and from the United States are either have made the adjustments or in process. There's not that many, well, there's some that are resisting the change. Part of it is traditional mission agencies that don't change can't recruit people, younger people in particular. And so a lot of them still have older people they're trying to create on support. But they're just not thriving because the nature of how polycentric mission is kind of beginning to shut them down. And so many traditional mission agencies have adjusted or beginning to adjust to more collaborative environments to really change the way they do missions, which makes sense. So in the articles, it talked about what God is already doing, the polycentric world of Christianity, and the interview that Alan Ye did, I thought really articulated that well. But we also get into topics of, that's just descriptive topics. We also do, how do you organize differently? How do you train differently? How do you resource differently based upon this change? So today we can kind of go whichever way you want to. If you want to just talk about what's happening in description, or if you want to move into either resourcing, leading, and get into how you train people differently, we can get into practical application. That's what we've been working on for 20 years. So it really depends on what you want to talk about. So my first question is for those of you have either went through the resources, the 6 little things that Kathy put out there that Lausanne did, or have read about polycentric mission, what jumped out to you as most interesting, or what surprised you, or where in all those would you like to go deeper? So what was most interesting, what surprised you, and where would you like to go deeper? So Pierre, good to see you. So you always have the best background. So, and what I like about Pierre is he has his he puts on his head things so it looks like he has a Jesus halo. It's just really cool. It literally looks like he has a halo. And so I don't know how you do that, but you're the only one I've ever met that actually has a halo. I know Jesus has one, but I haven't met him face to face. So pretty cool. So let's jump in. Enjoy. If you want to say something, just type it and we will just read it that way. So what was most interesting? What surprised you about Polycentric and where would you want to go deeper?
So while waiting for the rest to speak, I ask the question first, since you said I like to ask questions. Just now you mentioned that I'm so bad at it.
Polycentric that's the latest fad way of saying it. Nothing wrong with it. It's great. But there will be another way of saying it. You know how it works later. But
yeah, but the interesting thing that you mentioned just now was polycentric is very linked to decentralized model in the business world. Can you elaborate more about that?
Okay, I'm going to do real quick. So actually in the 1850s, okay, decentralized models and theories came out in the political world, starting in France. And they were highly, highly worked on for a long time. In the 1930s, it moved to decentralized models in the military world, surprise. And they were honed in World War II and then all the wars prior to that. And so polycentric, even though it's a phrase that's used, the decentralized models. So in the 1980s, it was said that this was the highlight of decentralization ever in the world. There was a quote on that. So what happened in the business world is, and notice how in the mission world, this is driven morally. We have a moral imperative to be polycentric. Got it. God has already created polycentric. But in the military world, the political world, and the business world, it's driven practically. So what happened is businesses that were global international businesses realized if you use management by objective, which has the people at the top coming up with the decisions, telling everybody down below what is your quota to do, in something in, let's say this is a UK-based company, an amazing opportunity happens in India, okay? By the time it works its way up to these people and they kind of don't understand it, by the opportunity's gone, okay? And so they realized that centralized approaches to organizational development had to change because otherwise they're losing opportunities. The second thing happened is the tech world. In the tech world, things change so fast that if you centralize your authority and be hierarchical, you'll miss the opportunity. So they started creating decentralized models of, and they called them vision and values, a distributed decision-making. And then, of course, comes along Dennis Bakke, who creates the quintessential model that everybody studied through his decision-making process. But the driver of that was efficiencies, moving faster. Two quotes. The quote back in the late 80s was, to make this up, was the fast and the small will eat the big and the slow. Okay, that was their question. And then Peter Drucker said, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, because to hold together decentralizing decision making, you have to hold it together. You have to, in an organization, you have to have it aligned by vision and values. Otherwise, you have anarchy. You can't sustain it. And so there's a type of polycentric that's heaven, and there's a type of polycentric that's hell. Okay, so God said, I created this earth. Okay, and I'm going to give polycentric leaders by giving authority to Adam and Eve. Adam actually named the animals. Okay, so it's God's creation, but God distributed and decentralized the decision making, right? But with that, he also said, not only do I give you decentralized authority, I also give you decentralized responsibility and accountability. So in the cool of the evening, I would imagine Adam and Eve are walking and God says, okay, how did it go today? And Adam goes, we tried to build a shelter, just collapsed and failed, totally failed. We got the animals to help us and the tigers were laughing at us. And so God said, have you ever thought about maybe doing a center pole? Oh, that's a great idea. We'll do that tomorrow. So the conversation wasn't about shame. We failed. It was about learning. Okay. The minute though but Satan said, I want distributed authority. Okay. I rebel against God, but I don't want to be aligned to God, and vision and values are obedience. And so he convinced Adam and Eve of the same thing. So now authority, responsibility, and accountability submitted to a common cause, a common vision, a common person, God, that's heaven. That's the kingdom. That's the garden. That's the New Jerusalem. But when you have distributed decision-making with authority distributed, but not accountability and responsibility, that's hell. Okay. And so it's important when we talk about polycentric mission leadership, that we also talk about alignment to a common vision and values. So distributed decision-making, but alignment to common vision and values, which you all have participated in. You don't, it doesn't just hand down, so that you don't separate distributed authority without also separating distributed accountability and responsibility. And so that all three have to go together. That's how it was in the garden. That's what Dennis really worked on hard, because he was trying to create a company that was garden-like, kingdom-like. And so those are some of the backgrounds on that, Jonathan.
So if that's the case, then how do you apply that to the mission field? Because if that's the case, then the mission field shouldn't even have a centralized. Each local setup does their own thing. Then we will even solve this problem, right? They'll make the decisions on their own. They don't even worry about distributed leadership and accountability, because they're only accountable for their own nation. Will that makes more sense than to have a term called polycentric coming out?
Depends. Okay. I think there are excellent mission that's local. Okay. And that's all it is. But there are advantages to having collaborative approaches where you have a bunch of local missions, but they're collaborating because they're aligned to common vision and values, and they hold themselves and others accountable to those vision and values. So yes, to have a local mission that doesn't have to do anything else, that's great. But there's many times in the kingdom of God that you want to have collaboration that has the efficiencies of being multinational. There's all kinds of reasons why you would do that. However, what often happens in polycentric theory is their academics, and most, this is my bias, okay? Most faculty just don't want to have to do anything. They just want to be free on their own, and they're the smartest people in the room, and they don't want to be accountable to anybody. And so polycentric theory is like, leave me alone and don't make me do anything except what I want to do. Okay, that's hell. Okay, just saying. And so when you see people moving to polycentric mission leadership, you will have people pressing, oh, give me the authority, but don't hold me accountable and responsible. Let me do my own thing. And what happens is I think some opportunities are lost. But now in a polycentric mission movement, you have collaboration between hubs, right? And collaboration does require conversation, requires training, it requires compromise, all kinds of things go with collaboration. So it's polycentric, but you're saying, I want to have authority, but I also want to be accountable and responsible to my collaborative partners. That's what I think is the kingdom, okay, versus just leave me alone. And so that's why the word polycentric can be used to describe heaven or hell, right, depending on how that works. So,
okay.
Danielle, I'm going to let you go because I mean, let you talk, because Jonathan could keep asking questions. But Jonathan, you come back. But she's kind of going like this. So, Danielle, do you have any thoughts? Add something, questions, or your own thoughts? What is interesting about this?
Many. I think when trying to establish something like a collaborative network, again, this is personal bias, but sometimes I can feel like the lone voice trying to emphasize the need for collaboration. I'm currently in a context where perhaps people are quite happy in their siloed situations. So
you understand
when trying to set up,
you understand the problem.
I do. So I'm also wondering how you then navigate if you get past the first stage and they're willing to enter into a collaborative conversation. As a facilitator helping to bring that together, how do you navigate towards heaven rather than hell, to use your framework?
I think some of it is a little bit of a little theology to say, when we talk about polycentric, we're not talking about just leaving you alone, okay? We're talking about giving you authority, real authority, okay? With that, it comes responsibility and accountability. And so let's talk about that. Secondly, there's a lot of good collaboration tools. And so if I am wanting to do something and I recognize what I want to do or feel called by God to do is beyond me, okay? I just can't do it by myself. I have a motive to collaborate with you because you have skills and gifts that I don't have. But I need to have a vision that's bigger than myself, okay, before that. And so a lot of times in early stages of collaboration facilitation, you start looking at the need, because vision doesn't come except from needs and opportunities. So what's the problem? How big is the problem? Sometimes that's research, sometimes that's just good conversation. So you spend time, what's the problem here? What is God showing us? And then what is God telling us to do about it? Wow, I can't do this by myself. And as I've talked about the problem, this person over here actually stated it better than I did. And this person over here talked about how they live in the midst of the problem. They have more experience than I do. I realized the problem is bigger than I thought at the beginning, or the opportunity. And my piece of it is important, but I can't, the vision is so big, I have to work with other people. That's where the beginning of polycentric collaboration starts with, is defining a vision from God that's bigger than any one person and creating this sense of I have to be dependent upon others. One other thing that Jonathan mentioned is this guy named Bill Hendricks. You may have heard it when he's talking about it. So one of the things in our class is everybody has to read The Truth About You by Bill Hendricks, okay? And it's about giftedness, okay? It's a book, okay? And by the way, I'm leaving tonight to go to Lake Junaluska in North Carolina, and Bill and I and his wife and my wife are hanging out for the next 4 days, just sitting on the porch. He's rewriting his book, Your Work Matters to God. So I get to listen to smart Bill for all these years. He's one of my best friends. But here's the idea behind it is this: you tell the stories, you're trying to find your gift and motivation. And it starts by telling the stories. What did I enjoy doing and what did I do well, ages 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. It's a great leadership development and training tool. And there's in the back of the book, it gives you some exercises. What you find, and other people are listening because you can't really hear the patterns, is people realize you have a pattern that you can't even see yourself. But when you tell it to them, they go, yeah, of course, that's what I do. Once you realize the gift that you've been given from God, you realize you've been given a very powerful gift, but frankly, it's more narrow than you thought. And that's okay. And so I have this story that, when I was a kid or younger, I go, the church is a body, but I'm the whole right arm. Well, then I meet somebody that's a much better hand. Well, I'm not a hand, okay? Then I get beat up and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm not very good at the forearm. And by my age, I said, you know what? I'm just the tip of the elbow. And frankly, I'm really happy because I'm really good at being the tip of the elbow. And that humility and that lessons forces me to collaborate with other people because I realize I need other people. But sometimes that takes intentional exercises like what Bill Hendricks does. Sometimes that takes us get beat up. Sometimes it takes, you'll see him by like somebody like Kathy who can do the work of putting together a certificate. And I told Kathy, do not give me the permission to be behind the scenes putting this thing together. I will mess it up. And it's true. That's actually a true story. And so I would. And so I have to collaborate with her because I see how well she does what she does. And when I see that, I look at myself and go, I shouldn't be doing that. So I think it's about giftedness. It's about vision. And it's about understanding our limits, and limits are okay. There's nothing to be ashamed about that. So what other things come to mind as you're hearing it, Danielle?
No, I think that's really helpful for me now. I'm still processing. I might chime in a moment, but
Paula, what are you thinking? Polycentric leadership, polycentric resourcing, the resources, what jumped out at you? What was interesting? What do you want to go deeper in?
When I first heard this term, I was thinking that was more difficult than I thought it was.
Mhm.
But as I was listening to you, I realized that maybe I'm working in a polycentric mission when I partner, for instance, with Global Advance,
Mhm.
because they are an international organization. They partner with us, and in order to get finance support and other kinds of support that they provide us, we need to we need to have our OKRs.
Mhm.
And I remember this year that we were talking about conferences, and they were mentioned that the discipleship is something that would make more sense than big events. And we were arguing about that for some times. And usually they don't argue with me because we have, as a national leader, for global advance in Brazil. I have autonomy, authority, whatever, to
Authority,
decide.
which is Global Advance, which is based out of actually Dallas. But Paula is the leader of that. And a lot of it, what she does and others do is focus on entrepreneurship training for women leaders. So go ahead.
Yeah.
But you do, you're giving authority, but they also check in with you, right?
Yes. And I mean, it's interesting because this year we have an issue. It wasn't an issue, but we have a point because I have the next gen leader that he prepared, he planned a conference with uh, with youth leaders, and Global Advance were asking me, are you going to spend this money with the conference if the whole world is talking about discipleship? But they were not saying no, they were saying why. And so we had like some, and I remember at some point I said, you know what? I didn't say like that, but I said, you know what? In the past, you used to say yes or no, but now you're arguing with me. And in the end of the day, it was good because I needed to review and I need to talk to my team to say, why are we still doing conference? If we don't have a good answer, we cannot go forward. So in the end, we realized that what we are calling a conference is in fact a training,
Okay.
but we are calling conference because we are bringing the whole small groups together. But it was very interesting process because it's not that they are saying no, but they wanted to understand why. And if you don't have a good why, we cannot collaborate with people. So I think it's a good process. And now you are calling the process a polycentric one. I don't know if it fits or not, but I just remembered that. Do you
That's
think it has anything to do with what you're talking about?
It does. And so you remember in some of your training about joy at work, okay? This goes back to Dennis Bakke. So he created mechanisms. So we don't just talk about polycentric, we actually do it, right? And so he created 4 authorities. Actually, this was done in conversation with somebody else. 4 authorities. And so any one of us in our organizational work, and this is really important for collaboration. So when I was president, I had veto authority over anything that happened in the organization, okay? But my board had veto authority over me, right? And so, however, so I could say, no, you can't do that. Paula, nope, you can't do it. No, okay, that's a veto, right? However, if I do that, I'm taking the responsibility and authority back to myself. I'm not distributing it. So what Dennis said is the second one is called point authority, okay? And so the person that is the head of Global Advance for Brazil has point authority, meaning that you have the right to make the decision. It would be vetoed if that decision violates vision or values, but it is just because it violates it's not the opinion of the people in Dallas, they would not veto it. In my case, if I vetoed any decision in my organization, I had to go to the chairman of my board and say, I vetoed it. Here's my mistake I made. Wrong person in the place, did not communicate it. Here's why I had to veto it. These are my reasons, and here's how I'm going to fix it. So that means I'm not incentivized to veto a lot of things, right? And then the third of course, so yeah, veto authority, point authority. The third is called input authority. And so if somebody's on your team, they have the right to tell you their input, which they did. They also have the right to be told what you did with their input. Okay. The fourth authority is information authority. If they're not on your team, they have the right to know what decision was made, but they're not engaged on the team. And so let's say, and Joy wasn't in this cohort, but so I fly to Abaco, okay, to do an MBA class. And I get there and I'm getting questioned at the airport. Okay, well, why are you here? And what is all this about? And I've got my papers and all that. And so I said, okay, I'm here because Enid White invited me here to teach a course. Oh, you're the guy that Enid White. Oh, come on in. Okay. And we're going, okay. She's the boss of Abaco, right? So then we get to the class and Enid says, well, when should I start? And I go, I don't know. You're the boss. Okay. Well, you're the president. Well, but the way we work, right now you're the boss, okay? And so what ended up happening is she kind of began to like that, right? And so she would ask me a question, and I go in front of everybody, you're the boss, ain't it? I'm your input authority, but you are the point authority. Now, if you violate vision and values, then I'll veto it. But other than that, you're the boss. And you can make better decisions than I can because this is your culture, your people, all of that. And so part of it is my job to remind people, just because I have the title, often I actually report to them. And in a given meeting, in any given meeting, you say, okay, this topic, Jonathan, you're the boss, okay? And then next, Paula, you're the boss. And our job is to provide input and to get feedback back. So that's this polycentric decision-making, but with clear lines of authority. So what happened is Global Advance said, Paula, you're the boss. However, we have input authority. We are questioning this. You answered their questions and they said, what you're doing, we don't like maybe, or we're not sure about, or we don't understand it, but it doesn't violate vision and values. So therefore you're the boss, you move on. What they just did is illustrated excellent polycentric leadership, or joy at work leadership is how we describe it, using those 4 authorities. Does that make sense? But we like that mechanism because it's, just talking about it is one thing, but actually having a mechanism to actually implement it has helped us.
It's like a matrix inside the organization that, even inside the organization, right? That you can, you are the leader in this project, for instance, but we are supporting another project, and in this project you have another. So we are integrating and combining the leadership.
And you did a better conference because of it. But they didn't say no. So Pierre, do you have any thoughts, any questions, anything that as you looked at the polycentric topics that was interesting to you? You want to go deeper?
Well, honestly, I'm still kind of wondering how this is gonna be effective, because when I look at mission history and from my area of work in Ivory Coast, I have experienced the work of mission being pretty much coming from the Western world to the South. And then at some point, people discover that they cannot continue. The relationship was type of a father and a child relationship between the mission and the local church. And as time went by, people started discovering that they need to start turning over some of the responsibility to the local church. And as of today, I can tell you that there are some major leadership issues that the local church is still struggling with, which actually turned me into doing some research in the area of organizational leadership. And for me, it was a night opening to see how the way the work was turned in has had some difficulties. And during my interviews, people started to make comparisons. When the Western missionaries were here, this is how they did it. And now that we are among ourselves, local nationals, it's completely different from what we saw from missionaries. The mission area was better than ourselves. So based on that, I am wondering, now that we are talking about collaboration, is collaboration actually linked to sharing of resources or sharing of leadership skills or sharing of what?
Great question, Pierre. So Pierre is Cote d'Ivoire, and it's facing post-colonial leadership across the board. And again, is a challenge. So what happens is what we are trying to train you to do, Pierre, is to gently, or sometimes not so gently, stand up and say, stop it, okay? Now, what happened with Paula is Jonathan in Dallas backed off. He already had backed off and he was listening, okay? He said, let me suggest a concern I have, okay? Some of what you're getting is, they're still bossing you around. And so we're trying to help you learn to be confident enough in your research and in yourself to say, I don't think what you're doing and have done in the past is the best thing for the president in the future. So some of it is you rising up and talking back, right? What often happens is the former missionaries, okay, that are old style, right? Either they ramp up their control because they've enjoyed being in control. It's fun. And they want to keep doing that. Or they say, oh yeah, you just take it. And then they're passive aggressive and they subvert you. Okay, that happens. Or they abandon, just, okay, if you want it, we're gone. Okay. All of those are not good, right? But yet that's what happens. Okay. And so what happens is in collaboration, you say, we have to pass the leadership. And what we do is going to be different than you. And it's not going to be as good as what you did in your eyes. And frankly, it may not be as good for a while. We got to make our mistakes. You made a ton of mistakes in your mission decades ago. Now you got to let us do that because you didn't get to where you did unless you made mistakes. So we got to make our mistakes. And so Ray Bakke had a thing back in the 80s and 90s. Everybody said, well, what's wrong with Africans? Okay. Their nations are in turmoil. They constantly have political turmoil. What's wrong with Africans? Maybe Africans cannot govern their own country. Okay. You see where that attitude's coming from, right? And Ray said, well, let's think about it. So the United States was a colony and it threw off its colonizer, Britain. And then 60 years later, they had this horrible civil war. Okay. So colonization creates problems. Post-colonization means years and years of turmoil. You've got to let people work through the turmoil and don't judge Africa because the United States, had to do the same thing, it was just in a different century. Let that happen. And that's in governments. Same thing within mission. You may say, you know what, I did make a mistake. It wasn't as good as your thing. But we're learning from our mistakes, and you've got to collaborate with us. You've got to be present. You've got to back off. Don't control, don't subvert, and don't abdicate, but be with us. Some of the collaboration tools allows that to happen as, as they decline and you take over, but you do it in relationship. You do it in a way but they have to be willing to join that. And you have to be willing to speak up. And that's some of the collaboration tools we're trying to train you to do. But it's messy. It's hard.
Yeah, but for me, collaboration or polycentric ministry these days, for me, it means actually sharing about everything. But my concern is that the collaboration only is reserved to how far resources can be shared.
Sure.
I'm taking, for example, my own example here in Switzerland. I had joined actually a mission organization with the intent of returning to Ivory Coast to continue the ministry we've already started. I made an announcement in a church, and sent out information asking for partners to support our ministry.
Yes.
Not one single person showed up. And as of today, I didn't have the choice but to resign from that mission because what I need to be able to go on the field, I didn't have it. So this is a topic is very sensitive to me, and I don't see how polycentrism can really work these days.
No, I get that. And you're talking about polycentric resourcing at that point, right? You wanted to go back to Cote d'Ivoire and lead, but you wanted to have help money-wise. And again, I come from the West, okay? So you, Pierre, at any point you can go, you're sounding very Western, okay? And I go, guilty as charged. But I would advocate that in polycentric resourcing, those that are not in the West have to learn how to report in Western standards, okay? So Western funders want to have paper. Give me paper, all right? Paper, 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 paper. And if you give them good paper, then they'll have a relationship with you, right? It's an interesting versus in Africa, it's let's have a relationship, and then in that relationship, let's ask for money. It's different. And then they want impact measurements. They want key performance indicators. And in some ways, I don't know that you're going to get past that. So some of it is saying, okay, I know that God is calling me to have polycentric mission back in Cote d'Ivoire. I know that God is, these people have a generous heart, mostly, but they're not knowing what I'm doing or how to connect to it. And in some ways, they get ownership, they get their own excitement and impact when you figure out how to communicate to them in their terms and their culture what you're doing and report in a way that makes sense to them. And so a lot of the training here we'll do with you and others is how do you learn as an African to talk like a European or an American when you're asking for money and reporting money. Wish it wasn't the case, but the money is in that's there's a lot of money in North America and Europe. And so you almost have to learn how to be bilingual. But it doesn't mean that you have to give up control of your mission, but you have to be bilingual when you raise money. And that's my bias. But again, I'm coming from North America, but I have tried and tried to find Western people that are willing just to give without that, and they just don't. So we're wanting to teach you how to be bilingual. How do you raise money and do reporting in a way that a North American or European donor would respond and be excited about? Okay.
But Dr. Smith, what you just mentioned has so many dimensions behind it, right? It could be a dimension of cross-cultural, it could be a dimension of accountability. I don't even see as polycentric, or I don't even understand polycentric enough for me to see that the issue that he brought up is related to that. I just simply say as it's just being sensitive, being cross-culturally, and then being able to influence people, and to understand, to influence people, you need to understand the context and the culture they are coming in from, because there's a lot of, we also need to be accountable, right? Good stewards of the resources that's given as well. So I'm still a bit lost. How is it related to polycentric, which is
Jonathan, it's a good question.
Right?
So the word polycentric is kind of being used in Lausanne to mean everything, okay? And that's good, okay? Nothing wrong with that. It's a cool term. But you're kind of going, yeah, but this is just good cross-cultural. Yes, but it's also a change of identity. So the donors to Pierre are saying, they used to be going, it's our mission, we control it because Pierre is African, so he's not as smart as we are because we got the money, we're smarter, okay? Polycentric is going, no, actually Pierre is smarter than us about Cote d'Ivoire because he lives there, he speaks the language, yet we have money and God is giving us a stewardship of the money. He needs to learn to be how to speak to us about the money, but we need to learn to hands off and let him do what he does. So polycentric does apply, but you're also talking about just good cross-cultural, human, emotional intelligence, listening, and not always having to have your ego forward. So yes, yes, and yes. So Danielle, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, you touched on what I was just going to ask about actually, because whilst I do agree that there is an element of training to sound European and how to report, a lot of my master's research was actually on how donor pressure can influence cross-cultural missionaries. And obviously that's a huge topic in itself, and how it can lead to the fabrication of results to get income and it's a huge cycle. But to touch on what you're talking about with the polycentricism side of it, how can we tackle training for Western donors, churches, individuals to also learn to embrace humility and often while still getting accounted? Like it's that two-way side of it. I don't think we could just say, Pierre, you need to learn this. Like, how do Western churches learn as well?
Well, you hit on it, Josh. So there is a group called Generosity Path. Have you ever run across them at all? It's Daryl. So it comes out of the McClellan Foundation. They're from Tennessee in the United States. It's called Generosity Path. And then connected to them is a U.S. partner called Generous Giving. They're both the same, but one is more. And those are two good resources. What Generous Giving has decided is you get wealthy people to come to conferences, and then you film them telling about their stories of generosity. Okay. And they listen to each other. So if I'm a wealthy person and you come up, I will listen to another wealthy person often better than I will listen to a not a wealthy person. Just that's culture. It's how it is. So if the videos that they shoot are showing a wealthy person who's humble, another wealthy person watches that and goes, and then they platform the humble givers in their conferences, it helps to begin to change the culture. Then they have Journeys of Generosity, which starts Friday night in a very nice hotel. And then you go in a wonderful hotel all day Saturday to about 4 o'clock. And they put forward people that are talking about generosity, and they help each other do that in very nice hotels. And by the way, they are willing to help pay for that to happen in countries like Cambodia. Difficult because you've got to figure out where are the wealthy Christians, okay? That's a whole different issue. We've done it in Vietnam. It's hard. India is easier. Malaysia is easier, a lot easier. Singapore, of course. So they're willing to come in and create journeys of generosity, even in countries, to help create generosity inside the country. I think that's a good resource of training. And then you can also have people like Paula's leaders who kind of tell the stories of how when they give up control, it's actually better. Okay. And so telling the stories is probably the best way to train rather than shaming. And then also just generosity training, because you got to be generous before you're willing to be humble, to give up control to Pierre rather than try to think you're the smartest. And we all want impact. We all want to be significant. And sometimes we do that. And if you have money, you can play God in other people's lives that don't have money. And that is very sinful. Because you can say, I am omniscient. I'm omniscient. I know better than you, even though I didn't grow up in Cote d'Ivoire. I'm omnipresent because I can take pictures of all the kids that are getting stuff in Cote d'Ivoire and bring it back and tell people. And it's really godlike, but not a good godlike. And so it is retraining. And the short-term missions thing, trying to help people understand what that really is and be humble, that's hard. But anyway, you've nailed a journey that's really difficult, really difficult. So we need to train Pierre how to stand up, how to talk bilingual, okay, to donors. But we also have to train the other side to how to be humble and to realize God has put him in a place that only he can do and they can't. So it's a hard thing. It's a journey. So what? Go ahead.
I'm kind of surprised that I have to learn how to talk after doing all the training in Western schools, learning all the methodologies of Western business schools. So I'm wondering what type of talk are you talking about?
So some of it is how you articulate it in paper, frankly. What is the need? What is the opportunity? What's the vision? How will you measure it if it accomplishes? What is the strategy? And I can go through this. This is what our training does, Pierre. What is the strategy? Budget is just another way of stating the strategy. How will I hold myself accountable and be measured? And then later, what's my track record? And kind of who's the skill of my team? Those are the things they're looking for. But what we do in our training is often it is very normal in another culture to say, okay, so let's say I'm looking for money and you're the person that has the money. So you're my hand, right? And so what happens is I come to you and I say, Pierre, this is what I'm doing. I'm excited by what I'm doing. That's not very good. What I need to do is get you alongside of me and say, together, let's look at the need. Let's look at the opportunity. We are both on the same side until the donor understands what the need and the opportunity and they feel it. They don't always do. Sometimes they're not interested. Then you can engage them on your strategy and your vision. But it's a way of really having a conversation. It starts off transactional, okay? But you want to move to sustain interdependence, a communion of giving and receiving. But the first part of that is how do you say it in a way that is bilingual? and you've been to business school, so I'd love to talk about that more. I think you know what it takes, but it's how do you put it together? And it's about putting a lot more paper together than you would normally want to do. But people like paper. They feel like they can control it. And then that opens up a conversation to move from transaction to relationship. And the paper you follow up with the paper, obviously, of the relationship. It's just a different way the Westerns think in terms of give me a piece of paper and then I'll make a decision from the piece of paper if I want to have a relationship with you.
Well, in that case, I will say probably I still need to know how to talk to the Western church, because what we are talking about here, the same principles have been used in non-Christian setting, and the organization is working, and every year we're planning funding to to support the project. So, but my difficulty is really with the Western church. How is the Western church? How should I communicate to the Western church so as they can see me as a partner?
And
So
I feel the little bit of anger. I love it. Okay. Your anger is about the injustice, and it is unjust. And so I love the little anger because that's a genuine, justified anger. So I like to see you fired up and angry because it is. And let's be angry together, and then let's fix it. And so, but you have the right to be angry. There's an injustice in what's happened in the colonization and post-colonization. And often the church is the last one to respond to it. And so we're behind in a lot of ways. So we have
So
some.
if I were to hear the exchange, if I were to hear the exchange in the last 5 minutes, then I would say that in polycentrism, the main foundation is relationship. Because if you don't deal with that, then it will screw up everything else along the way as well.
By our love, they will know we're disciples. Yes, relationships are everything, but it sometimes takes some bilingual skills. It takes some anger. It takes some patience. It takes speaking up. It takes humility, all that. And in polycentric resourcing and mission, you got to navigate that. So new people have joined us. Balete is the academic dean, sir, doctor of BGU. He lives in Ethiopia. Brian Jennings has taught classes for years and years and years and years, and Brian is fun. Joy, obviously from Guyana. Sahira is from Pakistan. And so anybody wants to, we're just talking about polycentric and all kinds of things. And I know some people, it's at the top of the hour or more than that. You're welcome to leave if you want to. Here's one thing I'd like, where's Kathy? Okay, okay, Kathy. Would you demonstrate, and then we'll keep talking, but before people leave, would you demonstrate how, if they wanted to continue this conversation, that they could do that in the forum conversation in the certificate? You can also send emails to each other, but let's say if you did it, then everybody gets to listen into the conversation, which is fun. So would you share your screen and show people that where would they have a conversation to follow up this conversation in the chat room of the certificate? So Kathy, go ahead.
I had to unmute first, otherwise we know what's going to happen. Okay, so when
you sorry.
it's okay. When you log in, you'll just go to my courses and you'll get to the certificate course. So then first, just before we go on, I will put the recording here in the spot, so you'll be able to access that, or people that aren't here coming in later can access it. But then here in this section is the forum. And you've probably already seen the primary and the secondary groups. But down here will be where the discussion is for this topic. So each of the 7 weeks will have a discussion forum down here. So you'll be able to click in here and share whatever thoughts. You can add a thread and say, let's talk about the resourcing, or let's talk whatever, and go ahead and post from there and add there and reply and have a good conversation. So yeah.
So if this is interesting and you want to keep talking and meet other people, ideally, just to learn how this works, if each person here could go in and say something, that way if somebody wants to talk to you or spend a little more time, they at least can get a feel for, you know, where to contact you. And so that's what we're trying to do is, again, use content as bait for our conversation. And as you know, there's some pretty interesting people on this call, in this Zoom. Kathy, any other advice you would give us about how to use this for continuing the conversation?
I mean, just to use the discussion forums to, you know, talk, or if you, in your affinity group, when the question is, you know, what's something you're engaged in, you could talk about this call, you know, or this conversation. And then people will know either they want to go look at that or they want to not miss the next one or whatever it is. So just as a way, if that's something that you feel like this is worth referencing, that would be a good way to kind of cross collaborate it. And then of course, just to be looking at all the content is organized by these 7 conversations. So if you feel like looking at more, or, you know, looking at it ahead of the next session, whatever makes the most sense for you, that would be a good place just to kind of use the whole system to your advantage.
And so next week, same time, same location, we're having another conversation. And what's our topic next week? Could you show them where that is?
Yeah, sure. It's the how can emerging populations, yeah, I went too far. How can emergent populations be reached? So this just goes through all of the State of the Great Commission information, some of these key generation or key population groups that are changing, different podcasts, different specific areas of the world or population groups that would just be interesting. And obviously, you don't have to read it all. Pick the ones that are interesting to you, the ones that are appropriate for your context, and as a way to engage that.
So a lot of good content on that topic, and then we will talk about it. We'll also steer the conversation based upon kind of what people want to talk about. So, you know, Jonathan, you may want to be talking about how do we reach the secular people in the business world that are unreached in Singapore, okay? That may not be in the content, but that's a very viable conversation. Versus Danielle's in Cambodia, and there are some major people groups that are unreached there. Cote d'Ivoire has, in Western Africa, there's all kinds of groups that are difficult to reach, difficult populations. So what we will do is, based upon the reading and the content, then we will shape the conversation here based on what y'all want to talk about.
Before I stop sharing, anybody have any questions about how any of this works? We've done a few demos on the Thursdays, but it can be tricky for some people. So while I'm here, I can answer.
So I'm happy to stay on. I wanted to give y'all freedom, that those of you who've been on for a while, to drop off because you may be going too long. But also, we'll stay on for a while. We had some new people. Joy, we're seeing you. Oh my goodness.
Yes, I put on my camera to say hi and bye.
Oh, well, good to see. Now, see how big her
All right,
smile
take
is?
care.
It's the biggest smile in the world. I mean, it always is just this gigantic smile. So, and Joy has been a part of the women.
Oh, this is a better,
Yeah, the women
better lighting.
day and other things. So, all good. Good to see you.
Just
All right, then take care. Bye-bye.
Good to see you, Joy. Okay.
By the way, I'm sorry, I think I'm not sure about the time that the class starts. It's 10 or 10:30?
Well,
I
what
mean,
it was, it's an hour and 15 minutes ago. So whatever that is, that was 8 o'clock for me.
9 CDT.
It'll be next Friday
About that. Yeah.
at the time that's an hour and 15 minutes earlier than what it is right now, wherever you are.
Okay.
Wherever that is. Okay.
And the Zoom is always this one, because I didn't find the information. So this was the reason that I got kind of lost. The Zoom is
Yes.
always this
So
one.
the Zoom will be the same as this one for all of these. The open houses were a different Zoom, so that's probably part of that confusion. But this is for all of our sessions here, and these links are in the global conversations schedule in the LMS. So if you get lost, you can always go there to click on it.
Okay, thank you.
So polycentric mission, polycentric resourcing, any other things you want to, that was interesting?
All right.
Go ahead. Anything that was interesting that you'd like to go deeper on? Or even as you meet somebody else in the room, like, do you want to ask Sahida, what does she do in Pakistan? I mean, you know, that's an interesting conversation. Or, I mean, just whatever, you know, we're here to connect. So Danielle, in Cambodia, you have a unique situation. Challenges on training, and it sounds like you're retraining. How does Polycentric, and I'm assuming you're part of a larger mission organization of some sort, right? How far along do you think that, don't have to name it because it's being recorded. How far along are they, and do you feel like they get it? What we found with Paula, it sounds like her agency does get it to a pretty large extent. And what else needs to happen? And do they feel like they support you in Polycentric, giving you authority, responsibility, and accountability in a very difficult field? So Danielle, go ahead.
To give myself a little bit of grace in how I answer, so I've set up a UK company which allows me to consult with different organisations. So I'm going to answer vaguely for a couple of different ones rather than any one specific that I'm working with. It's interesting because one of the organisations I work for is huge, and actually they're fantastic at polycentric mission at its core, and its founders really embrace it. And that's where I trained 15 years ago, and they model it really well.
Good.
But the outworking of that, they grew faster than I think was potentially healthy, and they acknowledge that themselves now. And so now they have people leading places and leading organizations and charities that actually haven't had the training and the equipping to be there doing that. And so it's very different in each outpost that I visit. So this particular one that I'm in, I know it's been through different seasons, but the season I'm watching right now, I wouldn't say that they are actually in that. And I think there's quite a discrepancy between their practice and what they would probably think that they do. There's no Khmer leadership, there's no Khmer authority, it's all run by international. I feel like I've jumped back maybe 30 years in what ministry could look like.
It is a difficult field though. Cambodia is more difficult than some others. And so I can understand why they may be behind a bit.
Yeah, but I have seen some organizations that model it really well. I've seen some that are somewhere in the middle. It's a really mixed result. I think the difficulty is some organizations acknowledge it and they're working towards addressing it, and others don't want to. And unfortunately, that's one of the issues I'm in at the moment, is they like having internationals and leadership, and it's kind of everything that I previously studied of all the different reasons behind what leads into that, and basically just the big need for humility. It's ironically something I'll talk about probably till the day I die, is the need for humility, but it's a really awkward topic because if you talk about it too much, you probably haven't got it anyway.
It's not of my humility, yeah. So.
Exactly.
So again, some of it is the resourcing question, okay? As everybody knows, what is often reported to funders is not the truth, okay? And it's not that people, well, sometimes they're trying to lie, but sometimes you kind of lie to yourself before you lie to funders. And sometimes, frankly, the funders don't want to be told the truth, okay? So it's a problem. And this goes back to what Pierre was saying. And sometimes the funders just say, I want to feel good about myself and my money. So just don't tell me about the problems. Just tell me the good stuff. And that creates and then when somebody's trying to be honest, that creates, the funder goes, well, let me just give to this person because they don't have any problems. You guys have problems. And that's the problem. Okay. There are other funders that really want to hear the problems, and they say, let's roll up our sleeves together. How can we be helpful? If we gave money to this issue, which is not a popular thing, but that help you to build capacity so that you can get past the problem. And part of it is how you build relationships with potential donors that are like that or not like that. And you never really know until you get into the relationship. But I do understand often that donors say, I want to talk to somebody like me. I don't want to talk to somebody that I don't understand their language or their accent. And so then that makes those people that are not from the culture feel like they're important. And it says, I can't give up leadership, because if we give up leadership, we're not going to get any money. And in some cases, they're right. Okay. But it's got to be a process. It's got to be, something's got to be happening at whatever pace makes sense. And that's an issue that is going to face Christianity, but it's getting in the way of the gospel. And but I do agree, it's about humility.
Mm. And I think that's where the training comes in as well, because it's training for perhaps some of the Western people in those leadership positions to even acknowledge the need for transition and doing training and getting out of the way. But I feel like these are the conversations that we've been having in missions worlds for the last 50 years or more. And it's sad to see it's working very slowly in some places.
There was a book some time ago that was written, McGee, I think is the name. Basically, the point is that every human born, non-Christian or Christian, want to have significance and want to have intimacy. Okay, and that makes sense given what we see in the first two chapters of Genesis and the last two chapters of Revelation. That's what we get, you know. So what ends up happening is our significance should come from our relationship with God, and our intimacy should come with the relationship with God. And from that, we get to have significance as defined by God, not defined by others. And we should have intimacy that's disappointing to some degree, because we're never going to have what Adam and Eve had before they ate the apple on this side of the New Jerusalem. But we still, when we're disappointed, we get, so as we search for that, but in significance, helping people to go, God gives you the significance. And if you get addicted to this significance, he actually may remove it. Health stuff will happen because he really is interested in you having a significance, but significance based in him. And then what you do flows out of that. So having people, being able to have a conversation, talk to them, to be able to say, you are very significant. What you're doing is amazing. However, okay, your addiction to it is actually pushing out people that also need to be sharing this. And so it's not just humility. It is, but it's also just emotional intelligence to recognize it is the need to have significance, but you're doing that in an illegitimate way. And have those conversations is hard. But that's, you know, and it's, you know, it's amazing, you know, the traditional missionaries had this amazing significance where they could tell their stories and people in the church would go, ah, you know, it was a show and overstated. And because of that, that's a hard addiction if you've been doing that for 40 years to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
And when in doubt, I always say invest in younger leaders. Okay.
I was doing
Go ahead.
that, but I was never very good at it. So I
Very good,
can't
what?
say.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was doing that, but I was never very good at it. So I didn't get sort of stuck on it. But I didn't.
Well, when I say all that, I would say I represent that remark. Okay. So, you know, I'm telling you my story that I'm in process. So I have the addiction still there. So, but you were good at it, Brian. You're being humble about that. But that's a good humble. Yeah. So, Valete, any thoughts you have? You kind of jumped into this. This is our academic dean, so I always have to ask him to say something because he's like, you know, my boss in many ways. So go ahead.
You know, a couple of things. Thank you, Brad. I had to attend the Board of Regents meeting at 9, and the time for this class for me was 2 p.m. GMT, which is 10 AST, but the class started at 9, so I hope we'll fix that. Other than that, I really enjoyed the discussion already. The last few minutes I've been in. Polycentric mission, that is, I know, the call of the time, especially for BGU. BGU is trying to be a global university. And being global, it doesn't just, take ideas and ask people to accept as it is, but to take those ideas and translate into their own context, their own circumstances and situations in terms of culture, history, and politics, and so many other social elements. So BGU really fits into this philosophy of polycentric leadership and mission. And that is a very timely topic for discussion. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, but let's see, I'm going to meddle at this point. Okay, you've been a part of BGU long enough to see our problems, but not long enough to claim that you created them. Okay, so obviously we have been trying to be polycentric, mission from everyone to everywhere since we were founded 20 years ago. How are we not doing it? What is you just quickly? What are you seeing that where we need to focus as a school? And that also carries over to Lausanne because we're also a product of Lausanne.
Yes. BGU is so diverse. So we have this diversity at its highest point of development in terms of students, faculty. I myself am now in Addis. You are in Dallas, Brad, and many others in different parts of the world. So this by itself is, an important ingredient of that polycentric mission, efforts, and attempts. We are also trying to establish branches. We call it ecocentric branches. We just had one in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa. Dr. Martin has been, the leader in that regard, a Francophone program. We are going to have one in Ethiopia.
Pierre is wanting to go back to Abidjan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's planning. She'll be there by August 15th.
Martine is moving back in August, but Pierre, you're in Switzerland. Is that right, Pierre? Where? Turn on your mic.
Pierre.
I just moved into the canton of Neuchâtel, so my plans are right now question mark.
Okay. So he's the hope would be is I think what he's wanting to go is back to Cote d'Ivoire. Is that
so? That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Last January we had our immersion program in Accra, Ghana. No, our immersion program is one of our trademark, and we are going to establish one in Ethiopia now. We have submitted our application to get registered at the council for the gospel believers churches. The council oversees various churches, schools, universities within the evangelical domain. So BGU is going to be registered to operate officially in Ethiopia. We have already, drafted and submitted MOU with one of the institutions there, International Leadership Universities, operating in Addis, but supported by some of European institutions. So these are the efforts that are being done. We don't claim we are perfect. We are learning from experience. But by any measure, BGU is not necessarily an American or Western typical type of institution. It is really global. It's multicultural. You see, I was born, grew up in Ethiopia, but I'm an academic dean. And we have Dr. Martin, who has served as a dean from, France, and many others. But we can still do better. But I see, the good things, the good developments.
I feel like the area that we need to work in the hardest that we're behind in is in polycentric resourcing. It's the same. Sahida is needing help with finances that don't have control. Pierre is that way. We do run a very lean shop. There's no doubt of that. But I think that's an issue. Danielle has talked about we can be a bridge between donors and receivers and a communion of giving and receiving. That is a challenge. I think talking about polycentric mission is great, but the polycentric resourcing is really I think that's the problem in Lausanne. I think that's the problem in WA, World Evangelical Alliance. I think that's the problem in BGU. And
You know, yeah.
but
A little encouraging development we had in last February. Last February, we had Biju Ethiopia event, just for 1 week event. And that event was mainly sponsored and supported by Biju graduates living in Ethiopia by and large. They contributed some money, for lunch, water, tea during the events, and hosting Dr. Martin, who was here. So it was supported by our graduates, not by BGU. That is a form of resourcing. We can, expand on that, I think.
my bias. That was great. And I want to celebrate that, but my bias. Okay. So I work for an organization, and the leader of it said, the church is supposed to be a body that looks like what we have here, hands and that, but instead we're just a gigantic mouth with little bitty arms and little bitty legs. And when in doubt, we have another conference. Okay. And funding polycentric resourcing of conferences is one thing. And we've got a system to figure that out, because you get people to give money, then they show up at the conference and they, polycentric resourcing of conferences. I think got that figured out, but it's not the same thing as polycentric resourcing of sustained disciple making ministry, and that's empowering people to have their ministries and growth. So yes, to celebrate an event, how do we get polycentric resourcing of people in ongoing polycentric mission? I think we're not doing well in that in BGU, and I don't think Lausanne is doing that, and nor is World Evangelical Alliance doing that, the organizations we work with. And that's our challenge. And we've talked about that today, but I think that's a big thing that we've got to really focus on.
Hey, Dr. Smith, I have a comment and a question. My comment is, after listening for 1.5 hours, I have a better idea of polycentric, and I wrote my first.
But you did not go to sleep. You went to sleep reading about it, but I did not see you going to sleep on this. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I wrote my first comment in the forum, which you all can look at it if you want to. But my first comment is that whatever you shared in the last 1.5 hours is, to me, at least from my perspective, is an interplay of power dynamics. And I see this interplay happening not just in the church setting. I see it happening in the social service sector, whereby donors are happy to be in the limelight, giving out their money, and then the charities are trying to ask for that as well. So I don't see it just a polycentric mission issues as well. I think it goes to the root cause of the issue. But your question to Bilate also got me thinking, right? What is it about BGU, right? I think BGU is a very I'm going to be very open. Seems you are very open, and you have always told me that it's good to be open. So I think that BGU is a very elitist model, because you are working with highly educated people. So if that's the case, then it's very hard for you to have a polycentric view if you're already surrounding yourself with a certain group of people. So if you really want to deal with this, it's the same thing as I work with the social service sector and I work with the donors, right? The only way is to bring a group of people together that is from all spectrum, from the people who is really receiving it, the social service sector they are receiving it, to all the way to the donors, and putting them in the same room, compared to having a conversation only among the elitists, or what I traditionally would say, that whoever goes to the conference are already the converted. We have enough conversation among the converted. It is the non-converted who are not in the conference that is a problem, and that's always been the problem. So that is my understanding of today's lesson, which I'm not sure whether I've understood it.
I agree with that. I think you're accurate, but that's also going to be the problem with the Lausanne and the World Evangelical Alliance, because Lausanne works as hard as it can to get the most advanced leaders to come to their events. By the nature of the advanced leader, and it's an expensive event, right? It's costing a lot to go there, especially those of us that are full pay. And given that, that limits a whole lot of people. And then we're a graduate program. So, that limits a whole bunch of people. The World Evangelical Alliance, you have to be a national alliance leader elected by the denominations. And so that is the top of the top. And so the mindset is that, we could think, well, we're the smartest and the top of the top. And so we're limited. We also recognize, though, our calling. And Jonathan, we can't be called to everything. One thing that helps us is, our mission statement is to work with vulnerable people in places. That's our mission statement. The urban studies we do, we would, our little slogan is grace flows downhill and pools up in the lowest places. And we realize that God's grace is often seen, and we learn most when we work with the poor. And that's why I found Kathy working in the trash dump and in Guatemala, and I have an urban ministry background, and all of that. And so there's a humility in that, but I don't think we serve well. We had 25 students in Nairobi who live in the Kibera slums that went through. But we had a huge grant to do that, and it worked well. It did work well, but it took, Brian, I think Brian, you were part of that a little bit. Oof, I made all of our academic people really angry. And so just letting you know, Belete, because the standards had to change, the way we did it. And then we backed off and said, we probably don't have the capacity to do that as much as we want to. But it is a very valid criticism. But I think that's something we've got to, how do we do that? And how do we move into areas so polycentric across social economic boundaries with listening, curiosity, respect, and admiration for what God is doing with them, even though they may not be articulate. Something at some point I'd love to talk to you about is one of our students wrote a Christology of the inarticulate, talking about how Filipino people that are non-articulate really display the Christology of God in ways that the rest of us have to listen to. It was a fascinating paper, and I'd love to talk to you about that. It's Father Ben Beltran is a Catholic, but I really learned a lot from him that's about listening more than telling. But you're right, that is criticism. Go ahead.
Yeah, but BGU is a university, it's an academic institution, but we try to base our activities on practitioners' perspective. Many of our professors have other jobs to do. They are practitioners, leaders. They bring that experience to our students. It's not just too academic, not too elitist, but it's an academic program which tries to base its program, its course of study, based on practical real life situation. So our students would go and study social changes, conditions in Ethiopia or in Ghana, in Nigeria. So through our students, we may try to reach to the public, to the community. And one way maybe to consider would be to open maybe, a unit, an organization that may deal directly with the community, where we may serve the community. That is one possibility we may consider as a new program.
What goes back to Danielle's point about humility, okay? Just because we got doctors in our name doesn't mean we stop learning, okay? And frankly, we're going to learn probably more from people that don't have doctorate in their name, just by listening and asking questions and hearing and being curious. And so my hope is the doctor behind your name gives you a sense of the more and more I know, the less and less I know. And the more curious I'm going to be, especially for people that are on the front lines that see something that I don't see. So if we can have a doctorate of curiosity, that would be ideal. And with that comes hopefully a doctorate of humility.
Yeah.
Sahida, I haven't
think-
called on you yet. So Sahida, do you have any thoughts, even if you just want to say hi? So
Hello. It is very interesting talk and discussion. Yeah, I agree on many of the things were shared, and particularly in my context, I think it's the same as in other contexts like Africa, or the mission mindset and the needs. And so I would like to know and learn more about Polycentric. This is a little bit new for me. So I'm here to learn and to apply in my context later on.
Thank you. One of the things that's interesting, and Jonathan, you get a kick out of this, not a happy kick. So there is a burgeoning business network in Pakistan. Okay, these are business people, and the persecution in Pakistan is gigantic. And so there's a group of Western donors that have a lot of money that would love to pour money into this business so that there's more power among Christians because they have stronger businesses. Okay, you can see the mindset, okay? That's a very Western mindset, not necessarily a bad idea. The problem is, and there's money out there and they want to invest. They want to invest in businesses. The problem is the network's not ready for that. And so for all these Western people coming in saying, we want to invest in your business, we want to give you money to build your business. Of course, that sounds like a great idea. But one of the things that's nice about that network is there's unity because nobody is greedy at this point. They don't have enough money to be greedy. And so trying to have a good idea, but not ruin a good movement in Pakistan. And then the other idea is maybe God doesn't want the Christians in Pakistan to have that kind of power, economic power, that could actually increase the persecution. But see, that's not a U.S. mindset is, yeah, money gets power and power stops persecution. That's not necessarily true in other places. So we're trying to help navigate this group of impact investors to go, money's good, okay, that's good, and love that you're wanting to do that. However, let's let this movement grow. Let's really figure out how we can help it. But some of the assumptions you're coming in could be dangerous. And so that's just one of the conversations. Sahita, you're laughing. That's not a good laughing. So any thoughts you it's a sweet network that's building, but it's not ready yet to have all these impact investors come in. We're going to take over the country, you know. So
Yes,
what's your laughing?
I'm laughing because we have kind of conversations all the time on it, business as a mission. There are two things according to my understanding, that many of the organizations I see that they have a lot more focus on developing people, young people on in businesses, and they are trying to help them to set up businesses, and they're trying to educate them in business. But we see that the studies in among Pakistani Christians show that 80% Christian children are not getting any kind of education. So only the 20% people, young people of Pakistani Christians are having all that resources and money and in speaking that it is doing too much. There is a lot of focus, but to me, if I see the need, where these illiterate children go in 10 years, will they be able to take up any business or manage any business? Do they have any studies in digital media or marketing? And are they able to use these social media platforms to introduce or promote their business? What are we doing? I mean, it is good to develop people, but this is one stance that Noor Ministries, my organization, is working to promote basic education, school education for these 80% children and providing quality education. And now on, we are thinking that to endorse like business as a subject in their high school studies, instead of taking out children from school or colleges. Because I feel that for global partnership, they need to learn languages, particularly English language is very important at the moment. Even in Pakistan, our utility bills we receive in English. So if the children are not educated, how they are going to cope with the language and media and digitalization and all these things? So at the moment, there are two focuses: business as a mission, and secondly, all the big crusade. People are pouring money on big crusade. And in both scenarios, like one organization finish one training on business, they call participants from 10 different NGOs. And then the next week, there is another organization. They are doing the same thing. They are calling from all these 10 different organizations, and the same participants are coming and getting that trainings. And what about all these 80% people, children in Christian community?
So polycentric mission would say, before we come in with our hammer saying you must be a nail, you need this
Yeah.
BAM training, let's listen first. And this is why, in BGE, we talk about appreciative inquiry, asset-based community development. It's listening first, not coming in and thinking you have the solution. And that's not happening at this point. But I think in polycentric mission, like Daniela said, there needs to be humility, but there's also some tools, the appreciative inquiry, asset-based community development tools that force people to listen and hold back resourcing, hold back their answer. And then there's got to be humility to go, we heard an answer we did not expect, and the answer they gave us is not what we're able to do. However, let's go help them find what they need, even if it's not us in the center of it. And that takes humility and a reduction of ego. But you're describing a case study of where polycentric mission should be, but it's not. It's about
To me, the power is to provide education. I don't know how. I think that before we have money, we need education, that we are able to read something. Like we have a lot of scenarios where young girls are being persecuted for blasphemy law. And why it happened with them? Because they were not educated. So one girl in Islamabad, she was a cleaner, and people wanted to put them in this blasphemy law. They wanted to trap her family. So they torn some pieces of Quran and put in the bin, and then they accused her that you didn't see that you put some Quranic verses in the bin, you are accused for blasphemy law. So this is day by day happening. So if we want to give power to our Christians, it's not just only one mode of power. So education is the first one to bring them at this stage where they are able to read, they can have dignity. When people are working as a cleaner, they are inferior, they are downtrodden and inferior, they have nothing to say, they don't feel confident. So education brings them confident, and also alongside education, they need strong biblical teaching. And that's what I feel why I'm here. I could have been working in the UK after my bachelor's in theology 20 years ago. But God has brought me back from the UK. And from last 18 years, I'm educating 400 very poor children who would never been to school, and they are getting very good education, quality education we call, and around 60 in last 5 years are now reached up to university. And I feel that when I see every day parents are bringing their children And I see those tears, that how the Christian children in state schools, when they go, how they are treated as a Christians, and they misbehave with them, mistreat with them, and persecute them. So there is huge need of education, and along education, there can be a lot of things, business and evangelism and mission, and all these things can be endorsed in their coursework.
Let's help you do that. That's part of the getting you in the program and doing that. Brian, I'm going to let you make the last comment, and then I'm going to pray and we're going to end. But Brian, you get the last word.
Oh, well, I was just reflecting that one of the key things in asset-based community development is to empower the community leaders themselves to make their own agenda for what should be the funding priorities. And the best case scenario is where the local leaders come together and go to the funding organizations and say, oh, these are the things that we really want. If you choose to do anything else, you are completely on your own, and we will just tell our people all to ignore you. So you better do what we want, because this is what the Holy Spirit is telling us. And since BGU is educating so many local and majority world leaders, that's got to be one of the orientations that we encourage in our students and in our graduates.
So Brian, you're an activist, and Pierre is becoming an activist. You got a little anger there, which is where you start. That's good. You got to be an activist. And so we like activists, but there's some good activist tools. But I love the attitude of saying, this is what we want. If you don't give it to us, good luck, because you ain't going to get nothing. Okay. Because we're not going to have anybody cooperate, you know. That's Brian. Okay. So he's an activist. And that's part of the process. We're overstating, but it's part of the process. Let me pray for us. Father, we are all, you wired us to take action and solve problems. But as we end this 2 hours conversation, I don't know that we have any new solutions. But we've entered into some friendships, perhaps some new friendships. It's frustrating, but you made us so that we trust you and we want to trust you. You made us that we are persistent, we don't give up. You wired us that way, and you know that. And Father, as we leave this, we just lift up that we could hear where you want us to go. You're going to solve this, and we would love to be a part of this as you so choose. And thank you for making us be activists. We are sometimes sad because we see problems that seem to be so far beyond us, and we give you that sadness. Give us hope, give us direction, let us know our little piece in the solution. We don't want to get ahead of you, but we certainly don't want to be passive. So let us follow you well. Thank you for just the friendships that maybe started today, have grown today. Thank you for the community here. I think this is divine appointments. Give us wisdom on how we can grow together and grow towards you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank y'all for your time today. Danielle, you're here for 2 hours. Kathy, you're here for 2 hours. Thank you for that. Jonathan, 2 hours. Thank you for that. Glad you stayed awake. So kidding. But a lot of fun. I've just fun to be with you. And please, I hope you continue the conversation. I'd love to see what you write up in the forum that's connected to this particular thing. So same time next week, have another conversations, and same Zoom room. Kathy, you get the last word since you organized all this. Any thoughts you have or advice?
I was just impressed. I was counting. We have 11 nations represented, and Brad, you and I are the only ones from the States, and I love that. So I'm just excited by that. And I don't know. That's what makes BGU great to me. It's just that we can hear from each other, and technology is so good that it lets us. So
Amen.
thank you. Thank you all for coming, and invite your friends. Tell them this was awesome.
God is good. Thank you. All right. Thank y'all for the time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Janice.